have, or maybe in the past, have submitted, when we've called for white papers, taking a look at some of the, some of the things happening around the country, and some action steps and things going on that we want to hear about so that we can enrich each other in the field. And so we are really excited that during this forum we will have 2 presentations from white papers, and the first one will be happening now. And so I'm very, very excited to introduce my friend Sean Allen. Sean is the Diocesan Director of, is it Young Adult and Campus, Sean? Yeah. Okay, good. Young Adult and Campus Ministry in the Diocese of Fort Wayne, South Bend. And he's really going to dive deeper into this sense of accompaniment. And right now there's some helpers that are passing around a handout of his, and he will dive in deeper to this notion of accompaniment. So Sean, welcome.
Thank you, Diana. And get your bingo cards ready, because we're going to be probably hitting a lot of those bingo squares. This is, as I said, kind of this will end up being my version of what I mean when I talk about accompaniment versus what you might mean when you talk about accompaniment. So the white paper was titled, Moving from Event-Centered Ministry to People-Centered Ministry. So I've been working in young adult ministry for quite a while now. Time flies, seems. So right now I'm currently the director of Young Adult and Campus Ministry for the Diocese of Fort Wayne, South Bend. I've been in this role of director of Young Adult Ministry for about 1.5 years. Before that, for the previous 8 years, I was half-time diocesan Young Adult Ministry and half-time parish director of Young Adult Ministry for the second largest parish of the diocese. A lot of what I'm going to be sharing right now comes from experience and a fruit of both parish and diocesan Young Adult Ministry. And I would say for the majority of this time, for definitely probably the first 6 years plus, I was in Young Adult Ministry, I was doing what I call event-centered ministry instead of people-centered ministry. And what I mean by that is I was primarily working off this model of Young Adult Ministry, which is probably the most popular model out there, pioneered by Father John Cusick. That kind of says everything we do in Young Adult Ministry fits into 4 event categories. So you have social activities, you have serious or study activities, you have spiritual activities, and you have service activities. Now often I see the serious study and the spiritual kind of combined into one spiritual, so it ends up being 3. But it's the same kind of, same model, the same thing going on. How many of you here are operating off of a model at something like this? You're looking at these 3. All right, this is what I was doing. And this worked pretty well for us, actually. We built a ministry. We engaged a lot of people in a ministry. But after several years, some concerns were raising. The first was we had so many more people coming to our social activities than we did the spiritual activities and the service activities. No matter how many invitations we issued, no matter what we said, how many people got up and said something, we just weren't seeing a whole lot of movement. And then I was also noticing, well, even within the other things, like the people that are kind of our service-oriented people weren't really coming to our retreats and weren't coming to our study, and maybe not even coming to the social. And the same thing with the study, our Bible study crew, I didn't often see at some of the other ones. So we're kind of like laying out this well-balanced diet of formation. But the young adults, of course, are just not choosing to live out a well-balanced diet. They're picking the thing that's most comfortable for them, and that's where they find their home, and that's what they were doing. So the ultimate thing that kept coming back to me was we were doing a good job of meeting people where they were at in their spiritual journey, but we were also leaving them where they were at in their spiritual journey. I was seeing some movement, but not nearly as much movement as I was hoping. So we kind of went back and started looking at, all right, what would be another model that we might do? And so we went to we changed over to a more personal model, a people-centered model, with the idea of instead of looking at what we're doing in terms of event categories, trying to cover our bases, we looked at, well, who do we have? Where are they in their faith journey? And what can we offer that would offer a next step for them so that they're actually moving ahead? And so what we came up with is kind of in this fancy diagram that you see there. It didn't always look this fancy, but this is what we started operating off of. And to kind of explain this, I'll start with the orange arrows that are going around. And we'll start with actually words that did come out of the mouth of Jesus, as Bishop said. So his first invitation that he had to the disciples was come and see. Like, no commitment required. Just come and spend time. See. So we're looking at people who are very far away in their faith, far away, maybe don't even have trust in the church. Those bridges need to be built. And just that invitation of come and see, of going out to them and offering something more. But of course, Jesus didn't end there. He eventually issued the invitation of follow me. Once they got to know him, once they had that encounter with him, understood that they were loved by him, then it came to an actual commitment required of follow me. So at the top, you have the person with their arms up, experiencing that interior conversion, making that intentional decision to follow Christ as his disciple. So then coming around there in the discipleship, you have his invitation to remain united in me. So often especially if somebody's been far away, they have a lot of reorientation of life that needs to happen. Developing a prayer life, just where to even go, how to even launch this. And so there's some time spent there, but then eventually also Jesus, after spending 3 years with the disciples, he eventually sent them and said, go and make disciples. And so there's also this movement of being sent out. And then those are the people who are then going out in back to the world and accompanying or walking with those people, other people around this whole loop, the circle once again. So the beauty of this, as we found, was this doesn't actually require any programs whatsoever. People can just do this if they know this is what's happening. And so we have young adults in our community who are just walking with people in their life around this with no activities, no programs, nothing. This is just what they understand they're supposed to be doing as a disciple, as a missionary disciple. So we kind of have try to get into all the buzzwords we could possibly get in. We have witness, proclaim, mature, send, and then we have pre-evangelization, evangelization, discipleship, apostleship is more church theological terms. And of course, we had to throw forming missionary disciples at the top because that's what Pope Francis says. And the Holy Spirit in the middle, making the orange arrows go around, because knowing that we can make the invitation, but we can't move someone's heart. It's the Holy Spirit working in their heart. So this is a lot of prayer goes along with all of this. Okay, so you might now be asking, well, what does this actually look like? So if you turn over your handout to the other side, there's a little more fleshing out just to describe how we categorize kind of the activities that we do, because we realize that although walking with individuals is awesome, and we highly encourage that, communal evangelization can be very powerful, extremely powerful. So we kind of, the four pre-evangelization, evangelization, discipleship, and apostleship, we've kind of broken those down into kind of what the goals are and what they look like. So pre-evangelization, the goal is to opening someone up through the witness of life, building personal relationships with them and developing the trust, so that then evangelization proper can begin with the goal of conversion of heart, of actually proclaiming the gospel in word, not only in action, and inviting them into not just a relationship with you, but in a relationship with Christ, whom you also have in a relationship with, and hopefully facilitating that they have a personal encounter with the Lord so that they can choose to follow him. And then discipleship, starting at forming prayer life, bring them to the sacraments, continuing catechesis, a Christian community of support, journeying, and Christian service among the community, but eventually also helping them discern who they are being sent to, and then equipping them to whatever population they're being sent. Because it's not us that are sending them, it's actually God that's sending them. And who is it and what kind of skills do they need? And particularly skills for evangelization, to go out and walk with others, accompany others around this loop, but also to change the world to a world of social justice. And all the ways of working with the poor, working with people in prison, whatever the skills are for the population that they're sent to. Below that, you can see I've made a list of activity examples. We don't do all of these, although we do a lot of these in the Diocese of South Bend, Fort Wayne, South Bend. So That's just to give you some ideas. So opening, like just sports, or they have, I know there's some dioceses that do the Catholic sports leagues, happy hours, holiday parties. Theology on Tap is taking place not at a church, out in a bar, something where things are going out to them. So they can come and meet, come and see this community of disciples. But then hopefully then somebody, as they've gotten to know someone in that community, that there are disciples in that community who can then invite them to something more, to learn more about Christ more explicitly, maybe through an Alpha series or some kind of retreat weekend encounter. And hopefully bringing them to conversion. And then on the other side, you have the Bible studies to continue to grow, remain united in Him, praise and worship, worshiping the God that you now believe in and want to follow, conferences, those types of things. And then, but eventually providing those skills. So we use Forming Intentional Disciples by Sherry Waddell, keep more bingo squares. We use a Called and Gifted program, also by Catherine Estienda Institute, where she's a founding member of. We do evangelization training, ministry leadership training. And so then those are the people who are then on our Theology on Tap team. They're the ones hosting the small groups in Alpha. They're the ones who are planning our retreats. They're the ones who are then reaching out, and they're personally reaching out to others. So just to kind of wrap up the things that I didn't move the slide, but you can't read this. It's too small anyway, because you have it. So just kind of wrap this up. So the things that we've really learned are, one, we were able to implement all 4 of those categories that I first showed, and only be doing the witness and the mature, the pre-evangelization and discipleship. And so what we realized, we weren't seeing any movement because we weren't doing anything that explicitly proclaimed Christ and introduce people to who Christ was and giving them the opportunity to follow Him. And we weren't doing anything to actually train anyone to go evangelize. What we were saying is, God, Jesus told you to go evangelize, go do it. And then everyone's like, yes, and then looking around at each other like, no, like we're not comfortable doing this. And so it wasn't happening. So we had to, bridging the gap there, so we had 2 things that were on the opposite sides, so the wheel wasn't going around. And so once we were able to implement all 4 of these, the wheel starts to turn and we start to see people movement, and it's been very exciting. And I would say the kind of the hinge of the whole thing was starting with our disciples and giving them the training they needed to go out, because I'm just one person, but with a team of disciples that have been trained to be evangelists, you can do a lot. In fact, last night while I was here, they were hosting something at my house we just finished one of our trainings, so they were having a celebration without me because they actually are the ones now who do the training for the other young adults. And I'm just there to supervise, to give feedback to them on how well they're doing. So this is something that can be multiplied, and it just, if you get the engine going, fed by the Holy Spirit, it can really move. So thank you.